it's extremely difficult to be young during this generation COVID-19 phase. But we also have to think about the future consequences, right? So young people also will most likely be paying for the COVID-19 impact for a long time to come.
Hello and welcome to CommsLife from APCO Worldwide. I'm your host, Tom Billinghurst. Every episode, we take you on a deep dive into the topics and trends shaping the communications industry and beyond. This episode, we're looking at youth empowerment, the representation of young people in the media, and the challenges of communicating the needs of the world's 3.8 billion youth to the top table of decision makers. Today, we are immersed in 24-hour news cycles, unrealistically curated streams of perfect lives on social media, and populist politics that have become more about election cycles than governing. And young people, those in their prime biological years for adapting to these environments, are the ones most affected by these forces in the world. So how do we change this? And how do we give young people a seat at the top table in the years ahead? Joining us to discuss these questions and more in this episode is Othman Almoamoar, the chair of the 2020 Youth20 Engagement Group and research lead at the Misk Foundation. Othman, welcome to the show.
Hi, Thomas. Hello, everyone.
Thanks so much for taking the time to join us from Saudi. I know it's been a hell of a post-event feeling for you, what with the All Things Y20 recently concluded. Maybe as a bit of context before we dive into the questions, we'll just note that the G20, the Group of 20 presidency, was held by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia this year, which meant that the engagement groups were presided over and organized by delegates from the Kingdom. Now, for yourself, that meant that you were the chair of the Youth20 group, whose responsibility was representing young people across the world and coming up with a list of policy recommendations to be presented to the G20 at the end of the Youth20 summit. So first of all, I've got to ask, what was that experience like, virtually, of course, organizing and bringing together more than 60 youth delegates representing their countries, their G20 states? How was that as an experience?
Honestly, it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life, but it was also one of the most rewarding. Now that we have 2020 vision as we look back. One of the key challenges, of course, was starting something this big, is when you look at the previous accumulated experiences across the Y20 spectrum, right? So every year, the Y20 is hosted by a different country, the same country that hosts the G20, of course. And so for us as a platform, the Y20 Platform Engagement Group has been actually alive for 10 years. And so this year was not only the COVID-19 year, but it was also the culmination or the anniversary of the Y20 too. And so a lot of eyes from the other Y20 organizers were looking at us. So due to COVID, not only did we shift things virtually, but we shifted a lot of our activities in the middle of the development phase. So that caused a lot of challenges for us in terms of how do we then make sure that we include young people's voices in a way that is meaningful, even if it is online.
So you touched on it there, the Y20 communique. The communique is the culmination of the engagement group's work throughout the year, you know, anywhere between 10 and 12 months work between international delegates goes into putting together a set of policy recommendations. One thing I want to ask you about the communique is how seriously do you think it will be taken by the G20? And is there a way of measuring the efficacy of what you guys have produced and said youth need to be represented and empowered because of 1, 2, 3 policies that you can make, you can implement to impact young people around the world?
We actually asked ourselves that question. That was one of the first questions that we've asked ourselves at the start of the presidency. One of the ways that we could improve upon this process is to do 2 main things, or 3 main things. The first thing was that we actually needed to improve advocacy. And to do that, we needed to advocate on 1 or 2 or 3 things maximum throughout the whole year. Concepts that we directly communicate or advocate to the working groups. The second aspect was that we need to improve the Y20 platform as a whole. The third was my biggest surprise, was that not a lot of young people actually know about the Y20. It's such a unique platform that it specifically exists for the support of young people, yet not a lot of people know about it. So we looked at all of the programs that have been happening throughout the past 10 years. We've seen that there isn't really much engagement besides the people who are part of the Y20, as much as we would like. But the main, I would say, challenge is the mandate, right? So you're supposed to, as chair, make sure that you have a communique, a program, advocacy work that you've done throughout the whole year that actually represents the views of young people, and you have to do it well. And so for me, the hardest part was the anxiety behind really making sure that we need to represent the Y20 in its best form, knowing that this is the 10th year anniversary, knowing that young people today are facing challenges that have been exacerbated due to COVID-19, knowing, of course, that we're turning everything into virtual all of a sudden, knowing that we have to include COVID-19 as a theme within each of the priority areas with the blink of an eye. And that created an opportunity for us in the sense that we actually brought in young people's voice more thoroughly because we're able to engage much more with young people. Overall, though, awesome experience.
Thanks for tuning into CommsLife by APCO Worldwide. If you're enjoying this, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us wherever you get your podcasts from. Catch up on all our previous episodes where we discuss everything from the future of aviation with Arabian Aerospace to the global economic recovery with The Economist.
In the second segment of CommsLife, we are looking at a recent and relevant news item specific to the topic we're discussing with our guest, who this episode is Othman Almoamoar, the Y20 2020 chair. So Othman, we were looking at a piece from the New York Times from September 2020, about a month or so before the Y20 summit. The headline was thus: young people more likely to believe virus misinformation, study says. The article says, new research suggests that Americans under 25 are most likely to believe virus-related misinformation about the severity of the disease and how it originated. The results diverge from past research that said older people were more likely to share false news articles on social media. So, Othman, on this theme and with this context, I wondered if you were to take this kind of study and research and apply it to a wider context, say the Middle East, say Saudi, say even the Youth20 delegates that you worked with. Do you think that's accurate? And do you think that would hold in a different context other than the US? Are young people more likely to spread fake news and misinformation around COVID-19?
I think when answering this question, one needs to ask, where are they getting the information? Within the Y20, we actually had a lot of deliberations on fake news, data misinformation, combating extremism, online, let's say, youth activities on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and all of these topics kept coming out. One of the main focuses that we've had within the Y20 is, of course, on global citizenship. And when we're talking about a pandemic such as COVID-19, you're talking about a pandemic that touches on the lives of many young people. And young people they get a lot of their data online. And we've seen that through the research that we've done this year on global citizenship and the white paper within the Y20 that we've looked at. And so within the online space, generally speaking, young people will focus on articles that are much more, let's say, attention grabbing and so on and so forth. And that could be, for example, one of the ways that this article is referring to people within the US, for example, or young people within the US taking on to this news. But I do know that within Saudi, where Twitter penetration rates are among the highest in the world, we've seen a lot of posts that are coming in directly on my WhatsApp from Twitter. And I'm like, wait, that cannot be true. And so a lot of questions around that is quite relevant for us. One of the main challenges, of course, is that COVID-19 is relatively a new thing. And so when we're talking about news, and it's something that is quite popular now and everybody's talking about it, the assumption is that whatever will come out of it will need to be, we assume that will need to be researched. But for many times it's such an important happening all over the world that whatever news comes out will be like the talked about new thing. And I think one of the ways to combat it is to embed critical thinking into the educational curriculum from the onset. Right now, young people are being bombarded every day with messages from they open their phones all the way to when they go to sleep. And so all of these things over time tend to be accumulated and does have an effect. And so sometimes these thresholds of when do you stop using your phone, what sources do you look at, becomes a bit too tiring, right? You'll need to somehow just trust a site to provide you with that information instead of you researching what is the article saying on that specific point and then going back to the research and then reading everything. That could be quite tiring as well. So there is an implicit trust as well within news agencies to deliver upon the quality of the work that they do. But it also is a requirement from young people to have more of a critical eye and look at the different perspectives before making a decision.
And do you think, looking at this article as an example, do you think young people get a hard time in the press? Do you think it's easy to vilify the youth for being too addicted to social media, to being not as get up and go as previous generations? Bearing in mind, this is also a generation that before COVID struck was moving the world towards remote working because of a principled stance on, I want a work-life balance when I work. I'm not going to continuously run myself into the ground for something I don't believe in.
What we have looked at essentially is that when we're saying that young people as a whole, for example, need to be improved or prepared for the future, we tend to always think of policies or to look at young people as one whole group. And that is wrong. One of the main challenges that you'll need to look at young people is you need to look at the multiple divisions, the different matrices that exist within their development. One other thing is that young people today, they face challenges that are completely, I wouldn't say completely different, but they're nuanced, more so than challenges that a previous generation has experienced. Let's take COVID-19, right? So COVID-19, we're talking about that, the whole focus has been on the older generation, right? Because the health effects. And so while it's true that young people are not, for example, as heavily affected by COVID-19 as, let's say, some other or older generations or older age groups, they are more affected in terms of the educational and economic lenses. We've seen 1.5 billion young people being affected negatively in terms of their educational access. Future jobs, for example, actually not even future jobs, current jobs, young people are working in sectors where they are the highest risk sectors of laying people off because of COVID-19 and also because of their own inexperience as young people who tend to be the first to have an entry position and so on, hence being the first to be removed. Not only that, but also young people tend to work in informal sectors, right? Where there isn't a solid contract, for example, to protect them in the eyes of the law. So all of that puts young people at a very difficult position. And it's extremely difficult to be young during this generation COVID-19 phase. But we also have to think about the future consequences, right? So young people also will most likely be paying for the COVID-19 impact for a long time to come. And so going back to your question, whether young people are vilified or are looked at in a negative light when it comes to these elements, one should look at why are they being quite urgent now. You're talking about a global population that is quite huge in number. They are facing challenges that even institutions that are extremely mature cannot predict. And then we have COVID-19 to top it all off.
We hope you're enjoying this APCO Worldwide production. To find out more of what we do in the communication space, head to apcoworldwide.com and see how we are helping firms build back stronger.
We are still here with Othman Almoamoar, chair of the 2020 Youth20 Engagement Group to the G20. It's a lot of 20s in there. For our final segment, we've got the Getting to Know You questions, which is a regular feature, which allows us to get a little bit closer to our guests. Othman, are you happy for me to fire over some Getting to Know You questions?
Yes, feel free to fire over.
Let's do it. Okay. Your earliest childhood memory?
Earliest childhood memory has to be me sitting down in my living room with a lot of our furniture, which I remember was like colored rose pink with many roses on it. My mom was a big fan, and I was eating ice cream. And I remember the flavor was vanilla berry or something like that.
The most important skill for the future will be?
Proactiveness/resilience. I'm not going to pick one. I think they go hand in hand. One, you cannot wait anymore. Everything is available at your fingertips. You cannot wait on institutions to upskill you. You cannot wait on people to give you advice. You cannot wait to be taught a lesson. You need to be essentially more active in the decision-making of your own personal life.
Social media, force for good or force for evil?
Good evil, evil good. Google, F good. I think, honestly, social media for me is just a tool. I think it could be utilized one way or the other, but also you as a person have complete control over how much you can be utilizing social media and the direction that you would like to utilize social media for.
I think we've just struck on a new portmanteau of Google, which we will be sending off to dictionary.com shortly. Love that. Your perfect escape would be?
Oh man, I have so many escapes. Okay, so I'll give you the escapes that I have and the severity of the pain that would require me to do that escape. So everyday escape is me listening to a fantasy book in my car through Audible. And it usually revolves around me being stuck in traffic in Riyadh, which is basically all the time. So my second level of pain means that I've either had a superbly bad couple of days, or I just am in a mental state where I'm just extremely fatigued. And that means usually me going to my favorite restaurants and then getting all of the things that I would like to get, eating them alone with either my favorite music playing or me reading a book. And it usually would have to be during a time where it's not crowded. And then the third level of pain, which is a pain of, it's been a couple of months, it's been accumulated, or it's been just quite a difficult year, I suppose. And that would require for me to travel and just debrief for a week or two somewhere nice and just chill.
Othman, fascinating chat.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us on CommsLife.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to CommsLife. If you liked that, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Send us any questions or comments on our Twitter page. And while you're at it, you can subscribe to and download CommsLife on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts from. Stay safe and be well.